In order not to detract from the youthful character of our speaker today, I will briefly introduce him. He is on the faculty of Berea College in Kentucky. He is Executive Secretary of the Council of the Southern Mountains, Incorporated. Berea College lends him to the council for that purpose. He is a consultant with the Ford Foundation, currently working in their Great Cities Gray Areas project. Traveler, lecturer, student of the world, friend of dropouts, and of all mankind, I take great pleasure in introducing Dr. P.F. Ayer of Berea, Kentucky.
I thank you for this. This is a very well-edited and well-said statement. I always like to listen to these introductions, especially these concise ones. This is a good one. I must say, however, that they are necessary, and especially in Atlanta. I must tell you from real experience that my worth is not obvious without this kind of help. I flew into Atlanta a few weeks ago. I don't mean to put that on there, but some way or another, we folks from New England fail to use them in so many places where they belong that we sort of get choked up with R's, and we have to use them up. And so now and then I slip one in. I came into Atlanta a few weeks ago, I must tell you, by mistake. My plane lost an engine over in Bowling Green, and we traveled on the surface at Nashville, and finally got a plane to Atlanta, and as I took off by plane for Birmingham en route to Montgomery, I said to my seatmate, who was a lawyer from Atlanta, I looked at my watch and I said, the dinner at which I was the featured speaker was over 15 minutes ago. And bless this guy's heart, he had never seen me before in his life, and he said, I'll bet they enjoyed that speech as well as anyone you ever gave. Now, this is just a judgment. And then right out here in the lobby this morning, I came down to buy one of your newspapers, and I thought I was a reasonably honest-looking guy, and I went up to the newsstand, and I wanted to be sure I was not spending my money for a paper I'd already had, and I said to the newsgirl of about my age, I said, is this the paper I bought last night? No, I said, I bought a paper last night. Is this it? And she said, if you've got a nickel, it's yours. And I think she thought I was trying to pick up a paper on the way. I don't know. You get brought back to earth now and then. And so these introductions do help. Now, if I could identify the most resistible woman in this room, or the most officially obligated or otherwise concerned man who came from duty, I would talk straight to them. Now, these folks are not easy to discover in this group. But I would like to make this a personal message from me to you, because if I could get you in a corner somewhere, I'd say this to you anyway. Now, I come with some considerable trepidation, to be honest about it. I'm one of those who never learns, and I come back to try again. But I was raised in this tradition. I was raised in the theory that when it came your turn to step up to bat and something needed to be done, you ought to do it. I asked them at the head table if I had told them the trial by fire by which this philosophy had been tested. One time in a little New England restaurant in the middle of the winter, I went in to read my newspaper. I had purchased it also, and read my newspaper, and I wanted just a moment of seclusion by myself, and so I was waiting till a booth opened up. And it was a winter day. The floor was wet and muddy where folks had tromped in here, and there was a coat rack at my left piled high with winter wraps. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this coat rack topple and start to fall over. into this mush on the floor. Doesn't make these restaurants sound very attractive, but this is the way. And operating by this basic philosophy to which I have been committed for many years, without thinking, I dropped my newspaper and grabbed this to stabilize it. So I suppose I didn't want to be blamed for knocking it over, well, for one thing, only to discover, to my horror, that it was a woman in a black coat leaving the restaurant. Now, I am a reasonably ingenious man, but I thought of 5,017 things to say, and not one I wouldn't do. I could not tell her the truth. I could not say, "I beg your pardon, madam, I thought you were a hat rack." And in some no little confusion, I just retired from the scene. This is the one time in my life I retreated defeated. And I suppose that she's still wondering what in the world I thought I was doing. Well, now, I've tried to think also what to say here. And I could miss it just as badly here as I did there, you know. Just as badly. But if I say nothing else, I would like to say that I am thrilled at this thing which is happening here today, quite aside and on and beyond my part of it. This is the important thing, that this many people are this concerned about this aspect of our society at this day and time. Now, I want to talk about what must be done and who must do it. Now, the first thing that must be done, and we've already done this, is to take a good hard, this is a New England hard spelled with an R pronounced without one. This is a good hard look at the truth and the statistics, and these are important. Believe you me, these are important, and we have done this and should continue to do it. But we must gird ourselves to not go home feeling virtuous and fulfilled by having done this. This is only the beginning. And truth alone is of no consequence. I had a splinter in my finger the other day. We spoke about this last night at the reception, and it was a bad one. Now, what really was, partly what was important was how long it was and how deep it had gone. But really what interested me more was getting it out. And I was not much interested in its diameter and its length and its measurements and how long it had been there. I was interested in, had it festered enough so I could pry it loose. And so here we're to talk about, I have a ridiculous, I want to illustrate how ridiculous truth and knowledge unharnessed to motivation is. And this is right out of your own library. This would be unimportant if I had not found it in Atlanta. I almost did it that time, didn't I? But this is a quotation from the United States Department of Agriculture yearbook entitled Crops in Peace and War. And it's in a section there under Transcendental Gastronomic Art. In case you didn't know this, it's in there. And in case you haven't, your copy of this book, it's just because you're dilatory about it, you paid for it, and you're entitled to one. This is the Agricultural Yearbook. And in it, it gives this wonderful recipe. I hope you've all finished a happy luncheon. Now, well settled back with a This is a recipe for boiled moose head. Now, I didn't just bring this in pencil notes. This is a photostatic copy right out of your library. All right, here it is. This is Bob Bloom's own special way of preparing moose head. First, skin out the head. Now, it looks like I could have thought of this for myself. Being very careful to save the ears and the nose. Now, I don't know what for, but he said, next he boils the head to remove all flesh and gristle from the bones, then throw away the skull and the hide. This sounds like a good idea, too. And saves the meat and the gristle. Now simmer this mixture in a heavy iron pot until it is thoroughly cooked and tender. Add a few bay leaves, a little ground cloves, and allspice, as one does in making head cheese from a hog. Now this doesn't really entrance me, but it goes on this comparison. He adds salt and pepper just before removing the kettle from the fire, pours this mixture into a mold to cool and gel, and then locks the doors to keep the neighbors out. Now what I'm trying to tell you is that you have had this information available and at your fingertips for 10 years. And I have yet to meet anybody who's boiled any moose heads, or what's more, who plans to. Look, just to know how to do this has nothing to do with the situation. And if you think this is not enough, you can also learn from this delightful section how to make armadillo sausage. I'm not going to make any, even if I caught an armadillo. Woodchuck pot roast, raccoon pie, potted muskrat. No, all I'm trying to say is that we know all of this, and we do not do it. And truth crushed to earth will rise again, but it will do no good, just unaided. Now we want to take a look also what must be done and who must do it. We must take a look at what difference all this business of dropouts makes. And your theme of your conference, social dynamite. This is implied. It's interesting to me that I'm associated with dynamite makers here. In the fact, and as I come to this business, social dynamite, we need to look at the comparative social costs. We need to look at the individual and social loss by the underdevelopment of people who are not what they could have been. But we also need, and I try to say this everywhere, it's not a popular thought because everybody wants things simple and neat and an easy solution that will be possible by next Saturday. But we also must look at the interrelatedness of this whole business. I come from Berea, but we're concerned with the Appalachian South, and you have 23 counties, and North Georgia counted in this area. And in this area we have some 8 million people, 257 counties, and did you know, not talk about dropouts, but in this area, only 2 of these 257 counties, not one of them in Georgia, I might add, are above the national median in adult educational achievement median. Only 2. We're in a world where any one of us could be the deciding factor in the entire world situation. This accident at Idlewild a few months ago, a year or so ago, was the result of one individual worker doing what he was told in an unawareness of its relationship to the lives of this great numbers of people months later elsewhere, across the nation. Now, I feel inclined to repeat a story that I used at Athens, which, if you will not mind, because I designed this for a secondary school group, that I find that adults respond to it also. This, I come from the... I've been seeking for a way to say to country boys off the farms in eastern Kentucky and eastern Tennessee and elsewhere their relationship to the world and everybody's dependence upon everybody else. And I say, if I get this thumb caught in the crack of the barn door and squeeze the juice right out of it, this thumb doesn't know it, but it's not as well off as it was before. And if this thumb had any sense, it would keep this thumb out of the crack. Now, this is not in terms of the great philosophers of the world, but if you want to illustrate interdependence upon one another, and you happen to be talking to somebody with a rural background, just think of this for a minute. Now, we need to take a brand new look at how the underdevelopment of any single individual relates to the rate of and the extent of the development and the fulfillment and the satisfaction of every other last one. Now, this is a demonstrable fact. I have innumerable biological examples to illustrate this besides this thumb one. Now, I would like to say we must also reassess our ideas. That's another R I used up. I'll get them worked out of my system. We must reassess our ideas of the potential of the individual. I have come just night before last from a very harrowing movie. And this was The Miracle Worker, the story of the woman who saw in Helen Keller the great mind and spirit of a person about to be lost to herself and to mankind. I didn't need this movie for this. I believe it anyway. But this was a moving thing, and I found myself in this day and age with tears in my eyes at points in this movie when the audience by and large was laughing. I did not quite know what they were laughing at. But I did not laugh at this, because I saw here untapped potential that came close to going down the drain. I'm not sure whether I told you about Tony Allen or not. I had a little boy in my class a few years ago. I claim the distinction of being the only teacher in the world who ever taught a course in livestock management and used as the textbook a dictionary. I had a little trouble with the dean on this. But I said to the dean, I'm not sure whether he was broad-minded or weak, but anyway, I said to the dean, I know what I need to know about livestock facts and figures. I do not need a text for this. But these boys do not know the words, and this is the text they need. And during this course, we came to a word in one of our bulletins, the word maximum. And so they just fumbled this. They didn't know what they were doing. Now, this was at below the college level, I might add. It just happened to be. And then, so I said, now for tomorrow I want you to look these maximum, minimum, optimum. Look up these three words and bring them in and use them. And they tried, and Tony Allen came in, and he had used the word minimum as if it were minor, M-I-N-E-R. He came from a mining section, and it started with M-I-N, and he thought this was good enough. He didn't read the rest of the word, and he didn't do very well. So he stayed after class, and so he and I discussed this, and I said, Tony, listen to this. Maximum, the most. Minimum, the least. Optimum, just the right amount. This is it. And I said, go out and use these words on the campus. Make them your own. You don't need to use these, just learn these words in class. They should be a part of your daily vocabulary. And if the other men on the campus, the men with whom you work, don't understand them, then this is a stimulation also. And we really cooked up a storm about this. And as he gathered up his books and put on his wraps and overshoes to go out into the storm, he said, Mr. Ayer, what are you going to give me for a grade this semester? And I said, Tony, I didn't see what was coming. I said, Tony, I haven't quite got it figured out yet. He said, I hope you give me the maximum. Now, I'm here to tell you that the potential of the individual is beyond our dreams. And I get just as discouraged on Friday nights and Monday mornings and other times as anybody else. And I haven't been a teacher all my life, but I can tell you that the potential is there beyond our dreams and beyond our ultimate achievement. And we can prove this statistically if you must have it. And one more thing I want to say, that in this day and age of multiplying millions of people, it's hard to see the significance of the individual, great or small. But I, from the bottom of my heart, believe this is true, and one time wrote a poem. I don't have this with me because I have loaned it. We used it in class the other day, and I didn't get it back at that time, and that is that there is a straw that breaks the camel's back. It is not necessarily the last straw you add, or the second, or the next to the last, or the third, or even the first straw. But one straw too many. And as a boy, we used to have a conundrum. If you had all the feathers you could carry, could you take one more? And the answer is no. And this means in a world of unlimited complexity, one person makes a plus or minus difference in every total situation, and it can be one whom we have despised as of low potential and underachieving. Now, having reassessed our ideas here of the whole situation, and the limitations of truth by itself, and the difference that this truth makes, and the potential of the individuals, we must look somehow or another at our goals. I heard Bob Eisenberg paraphrase what I had earlier said, and he did it much better, and so I'm going to try and say what he said. He talked to the group of teachers a little while ago, and he said what we're really saying to these young people, if you'll work yourselves to death, if you'll work hard and really achieve and graduate, you'll grow up and be folks like us. And you know, this seems to me, in much of my experience, to be one of the poorest sales arguments we have. Just honest engine. You look at yourself. This is not hard to do. This is not hard to do. In this day of frankness and mirrors and stuff, you just look at yourself. Now, I've been sharing with my students a new concept of life, it's sort of, well, life and death, which come to me. And it came to me, I learned this from Carl Hansen in Washington. He doesn't know why I'm quoting him today, but he one time, superintendent of schools in the city of Washington, he one time decried inspiration. He wanted none of this foolishness. He wanted arithmetic and English, and he wanted the cold, hard facts. Inspiration is a bunch of idealism and stuff. And I got to studying about this, and so I drew out for myself a kind of a horizontal range. On the one hand is death, and I experienced this. I mean, I have, before I was born, I assumed this was the equivalent to how it'll be after I'm gone. But at least death on the one hand. And then living can be at the level of apathy. And brother, we're knee-deep in this across the face of the earth. And then just one notch above apathy can become a period of sort of mild motivation. And then a notch above motivation comes what I call a high wattage motivation called inspiration. And then above this, you get what I would call chaotic hysteria. The outer fringe, the crackpots, the people who've gone into orbit, and they may or may not come back. And beyond this, of course, is death again. But it seems to me that the thing we're shooting at here is in this range of motivation and inspiration from which richness derives. And the other day in discussing this with a class, I had my last class with them Friday that I'm going to be there. They're taking their final examination Monday with me gone, which is all right. In discussing with them, one of my students said, well, what about apathetic professors right here on this campus? And I said, well, Ike, what about them? And so we discussed them a little while. And then we, not by name really, but just in principle. And then I said to these folks, out of your high school experience, how many teachers can you remember who really gave you the needle? I don't think I used these terms, but what I meant was who really had it in terms of obvious and contagious joy in life. And out of a class of 18, I found 3 who remembered 1. Now, this is not a scientific sampling of the teaching profession, but it's a spot check. And so I'd like to suggest that our goals need to be reevaluated. Now, folks do not like for me to say this, because traditionally we have used jobs as the goal, and income and security and status and make something of yourself. I don't know whether you read Sir Bagby or not, but you read Sir Bagby, maybe you're just too intellectual to read the comics, but Sir Bagby has a story of the little wolf going on now, and the wolf and the pigs, and the wolf was concerned about this little pig. He wasn't aspiring. He said, I think he ought to make something of himself. Maybe a pork roast or sausage or something, but no. We talk to these folks in terms, in the first place, they are unworthy of the ultimate goal of man. And in the second place, in this day and age, they're not true. We talk to kids about get an education and get a better job, and the truth of the matter is this is true only because half of them do not believe us. If they believed us and did this, we could not deliver at this day and age. Now, I've got to pass you an assignment which is more difficult than any I have given my classes. Unless out of this group, out of some one of us, out of our efforts together, can come some new way of inspiring people to be and to become and to enjoy this process, we are whipped from now on out. And I'm sure I talked about this over in Athens when I was a child, the old conundrum, why does not lightning strike twice in the same place? And you're supposed to say you don't know, so that I can tell you that the reason is that the same place is not there anymore. Now, we are in a new day and new age, and we must reevaluate our goals, and we must think of and demonstrate and live by a new zest for living, which embodies a sense of personal consequence in a constantly increasing world in terms of numbers, individual consequence and growth, in individual fulfillment in a future and a cause that mankind has not dreamed of. Now, this is high stuff to talk to kids about, and don't misunderstand me. And I know this. But in the school where D.D. Parker and I used to teach, there was a little fella of what appeared to be limited intellectual potential, who said in a moment of confidence to Mrs. Ayer one day, he said, "There's hardly a day goes by but what I think of something." Now, we thought that we thought that this, as a matter of fact, this was not a bad batting average. He was perhaps, but we must some way or another hold out to the least promising individual in the world his divine significance. There are two ways to do this. One is to be superior, and the other one is to look around and find somebody to whom you can feel superior. Now, being superior is a little difficult, but it's pleasurable, and the few times I have achieved it. Finding somebody else to whom you can feel superior is easy. And we need to lead people into this feeling that they begin to feel superior today to what they were yesterday. And we are on our way. And if this kind of a goal and standard can be built in, then we are engaged in a terrific process. Now, I want to talk about you in this in just a minute, but we'll skip it now for the moment. We've been talking about, we must take a new look at our content. Now, change is difficult. We are psychologically geared against it. People resist it. I've been with American chemists up in Cincinnati the other day, and they're struggling with this thing. New truths that nobody wants because the old truths are good enough. But we must some way or another take a new look at our method. President Dixon of Antioch College has just written that education, higher education, is at this moment, up to this moment, a failure in terms of preparing people to live in the age into which we have gotten ourselves. And that we must, in an orderly and intellectual fashion, reverse ourselves and look on into the future and create and design a future and prepare ourselves for it. I have two or three suggestions. Suggestions. We're fooling with what we call one-page books. I don't know whether Webster would go along with this or not. We're thinking of one-page books that we can stuff in grocery sacks so that people get them whether they want them or not. But then they would be appealing enough so they would consume them. I have a student who's talking about a system of family education, family tutors, in which the school goes not to the child, but to the entire family. Since I saw you folks in Athens, or some of you, I've come to the conclusion that the reason if that's the case, I've heard a lot about compulsory attendance. I'm a little pessimistic about this in a way, because I doubt the fundamental reasoning behind it. Maybe some of you have just seen the recent study of the percentage of teachers who believe in corporal punishment in the schoolroom. There's a strange positive relationship here. I'd like to describe it to you. As the age of the children, and presumably their size, goes up, the percentage of teachers who believes in corporal punishment goes down. Now, by the like token, as I think we must devote ourselves to a business of making education something which we must not compel folks to partake of. I cannot escape this conclusion. As a matter of fact, I have a notion that the reason we compel kids to go to school is because we're bigger than they are and we outnumber them. And there's no more reason for compelling kids to go to school in logic than there is to compel the rest of us to continue our learning process. Now think about this some, and if I'm wrong, I'm not going to say this anymore if you can convince me. One of my students one day quoted Aristotle and said, Aristotle says that nation is lost which does not educate its youth. And I wrote this on the board. And then under it I wrote Aristotle, spelled Ayeristotle. I said, Aristotle says that nation is lost which does not educate its people. And so I have come up with a concept which I would like to share and have it developed. Total education in terms of the need at the moment. Now is the time. And the average man is going to need to be retrained, so to speak, 3 times in his lifetime, they tell me. And we're not prepared for this. And I envision a total education program which involves people from the cradle to the grave in an ongoing movement. Well, I'm only half through and the time's going, but now we're going to get down here just a minute to some of the payoff. We need to take a new look at the community, and you're doing this today. But I want to talk about the climate of the community in terms of education. We have not really begun to assess this. Brother, we can get folks in Brooklyn crazy about baseball. We can get folks to have a tremendous community pride about this, that, and the other. But we have never really explored our potential to have a community proud of its developing intellectual potential from the child to the grave. The communication media, the men who run the filling stations, the men in the department stores to whom girls come looking for jobs, we could design and create an atmosphere in which it would be unthinkable that a child would drop out, because he would meet disapproval. But now I want to tell you, the people that approve dropouts, whether you like this or not, outnumber the rest of us. And they get approval by dropping out, which we are not able to give them numerically in any proportion, and which we have not taught the community give them, because the community has not seen its stake in relationship. We must develop a community-wide understanding and concern for this business of human development, not just dropouts. And we must design and create a climate within which a dropout is unthinkable. And if somebody shows up, is at the street corner, at the bowling alley, or at the hot dog joint or something else, he is met with a question, and it ought never to be the question of how are you doing? I mean, of what are you doing? It should be how are you doing? It should be the expectation that everybody in the community is on his way someplace in a designed program of upgrading himself and the whole social endeavor in which he is embedded. And this can be done. And it can be done by groups like this. Now, I've spoken about interrelatedness and so forth. Now look, I want to say we want to take a quick look at who must do this. And of course you know what I told you in Athens and what I really believe, that you and I must do it, but this is not enough. We're in an age of specialization where we all know what somebody else ought to have done. Brother, we not only know what he ought to have done, but how much and when. And then we go home and bask by the fire and look at the television and wonder when this utopian day is going to come to pass. And so I come to this conclusion that it must be done by all of us, including us, but not only. Now the pupils, of course, but only with motivation which we must redesign. The parents, of course, but I responded to a statement in there this morning. This is ridiculous for us to wash our hands of this, say this is the parents' job, when the majority of the parents are ill-equipped to do it. I was called into consultation in the 6th County area in Tennessee a little bit ago, and what these dear men wanted to do was to build a vocational high school in an abandoned school. They were more concerned with an empty building that wasn't in use really than they were with education, I think. But I went along with them, and they need it. The Huntstone area, the Redstone area, and others need these graduates. But I said, gentlemen, I could not come here. I could not come here and counsel with you about this vocational high school without telling you what the real problem is. The real problem. The anchor that's down is the 19,000 adults in this area who did not get beyond the 6th grade in formal education, and this was 10, 15, or 20 years ago. And I say to my shame that out of 15 superintendents of schools and public leaders, they were literally unaware of this. They were gentle about it, but they were unaware of this. And 37% of the people that you met in this area were below this educational achievement level. And this is the thing which limits us. And I cannot understand how we will beat ourselves to death on this business of educating children in a situation dominated by people who are not adequate. These are our problem also. All right, now I was a little bit hard on the teachers over at Athens, and the teachers are an important part of the situation, as am I. And I have a confession to make here. The teacher, I can actually pinpoint the time and the day when I terminated a boy's formal education. Dede, he was in my class, and his name was Glenn Wittenberg. And it was a crowded class, and it was a class on biology of sex in a co-educational group at the sophomore level in the mountains. And if you want a problem sometime, try this in a crowded classroom. And Glenn was a little bit of a problem to me. And I said, out. And I solved my problem, but I terminated his education on that day, and he never went in a schoolroom again. So the teacher is the determining factor, and it's rarely that we know when that time takes place. But I did it. All right, we must look at the administrators in the schools, but they cannot solve it alone. I want to talk to you about a county in which I was working with some superintendents a little bit ago, and they were wondering what they could do about the dropouts. And I did a little quick figuring on the paper there, and I found that 12,000 people, adults and children, are living in that area on a total income of $1 a day per person for health, education, housing, clothes, recreation, cigarettes, hot rods. This is all the money they had to spend. And we got to think about this, and the reason I mention this is that because for the educators, they cannot solve this alone. And they can talk themselves blue in the face, but when this kind of an economic situation controls it, the educators cannot solve it by themselves and must involve the community. And therefore I say the community must, the civic leaders, the political representatives, the religious leaders, every person in the community must become a part of this movement. Now these folks at the head table, I did a little arithmetic here this morning, which I think is correct, and I didn't know whether I have time to share it, and I haven't, but I'm going to do it right now. But I'm telling you here in terms of our effectiveness. Oh, first I must tell this story. All the stories ever happened in the world either happened to me or could have. But I spoke down in Clay County, Kentucky a little while ago, and after the speech was over, 4 of the civic leaders, Kiwanis Club, Civic Club, high school principal, others, got me in a little corner, and they said, will you come down here and say this to our groups? And I said, yes, I will. And then I had an afterthought, which I didn't think over very carefully, and I said, but what's the matter with you suckers? You heard me say this, why don't you tell them? And I haven't been invited back, and I hope they're telling them. But the point of it is, if what I say makes any sense, I do not need to be anywhere in person to say it. Because if we who are here today, if we, each of us, told one other person, and then that person and each of us told another person, and we doubled and doubled and doubled in 14 doubles, we would tell the entire metropolitan area of Atlanta. You would tell this just 14 times, and you would have communicated to every last man, woman, and child in the city of Atlanta. Now, this is how the community can do this. All right. Now, I've just about got to quit here, but we must design new answers. We must design new answers, and we must risk change. And there are new answers being designed in Florida and in Connecticut and right here in Atlanta. And I have thrilled to what Mrs. Parker has been telling me about the freedom she has had to experiment in your Roosevelt School. We must put our necks out and try things which may or may not work. I don't know whether you know about the little boy named Dammit, named for his uncle Dammit, D-A-M-M-E-T, and his name was Dammit Jones. And this is not much worse than Perley Fernando Ayer, but this is a little worse. And he was in school one day, and the visiting dignitary came around, and the teacher wanted to show the kids off, and she said, now, children, today I'm going to have you spell for the supervisor, and you may choose the word, any word that you'd like. Choose your own word, and then stand and spell it. And they went down the line and back down the line, and they came to this little fellow, and she said, and he stood up and said, I would like to spell the word constitutionality. And the teacher said, why, damn it, you can't spell constitutionality. And the visiting supervisor said, hell, woman, let him try. We do. What I'm saying, let's try. Now, I am experienced. I can't seem to get through a visit with people without talking about my farm background. But in terms of innovation, in terms of new method, I believe that teachers can do this, and children can do this, and average citizens can do this, dogs can do this, and I had some hogs that did this. I asked on examination one time, what is a shoat? And a big fat girl who said she was going to become a doctor, I've lost her, she may still be, she said a shoat is a high school age hog. Well, now, I can tell you technically she was right. Now I'll tell you about some shoats I had one time. I tried to incarcerate them. I tried to confine them in a field with an electric fence. And hogs is scared to death of an electric fence, I might tell you. I've seen them just simply break down and go into a nervous prostration with a leg over an electric fence. I've seen an old fat sow crawl through a hole smaller than she was just because she had an electric fence kind of wrapped around her. But I'll tell you something about these shoats. I had them in a field, and the fence was reasonably high for this age hog. And did you know what they learned? They learned to back off and kind of take a look at this, screw up their courage, and squeal bloody murder and run right straight through it. And what they discovered was that it didn't hurt very long, and it was worth it. But what I'm trying to say, so help me, if a hog can do this at the high school level, What's the matter with the rest of us? And my time is up, and I've come to the real gist of what I came here to say, I guess. Social dynamite. Now, who's afraid? I'll tell you who's afraid. Conant's afraid, and I'm afraid, and you're afraid. But I'd like to know what in the world we're afraid of. We talk as if these poor kids who drop out of school because they have no shoes, or they got a drunken family, or because they do not know what else to do, or because they didn't get a start, or be somewhere has not seen the... We talk as if these folks would not only outnumber us, they would outthink us, they would outmaneuver us, they would outsmart us, they would overcome us. This is ridiculous, unless it was stupid of us to stay in school. Now, they were dropouts before high school graduation, and I would like to suggest that much of my life, I live my life among people of my peer group who are dropouts after high school graduation. What happens to us? We sort of level off and taper off and figure we've got it made. And I would like to suggest to you here today that wars are lost just as surely and just as often and just as quickly by the duds that do not go off on my side as the explosives which do go off on the enemy's side. And I'm here to suggest to you that we need fear no social dynamite if we are the kind of social dynamite on the positive side which we were capable of being when we got through high school and through college, and if we do not indeed taper off. Now, I call them dropouts before high school graduation, and I call them at my age quitters. That's not a very kind word. But I think every man, Jack, in the world is not the man he could have been, nor yet the man he could yet be. And this means you and it means me. And I have no fear of social dynamite if I'm the kind of an explosive which can control this and go along with it and incorporate it in the total picture. And for us to cower back in our cultured corner as if these people, ill-prepared, could outnumber us and overcome us is ridiculous. They can do this, but they need not do it. I must quote you, if I can find this here. I don't know if I can. I've got a letter from a student. I guess well, it's in I'll quote it this afternoon if I don't find it now. A girl who was in my class who has written to me about her work. Here it is, right here. If you just don't believe that this can go on, here's a girl who is a dropout from college before graduation. Dear Mr. Ayer, I haven't heard from you in some time, so I thought I would check to see if you're doing okay or not. I'm reading this. This is Sunday, January 13. She wanted to know if I was doing all right or not. She says, I haven't forgotten you, even though I haven't written for some time. Every time I read an article pertaining to some bit of progress in a community that a community has made, I feel like writing and telling you all about it. I just finished a very interesting book about a rural teacher and her many problems. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse in a small conservative New England town. And she gives me the name of the book, by the way, which is nearby. I don't know the author. Just a few minutes ago, I watched a very interesting program on television. It was a program about the problem of what to do with old people, nonfiction. Well, so you see, wait a minute. Then she says, and so you see, I have not stopped learning or being interested in these things just because I am not in college. There are certainly a lot of problems to be solved right here where I live. Numerous bars, poor school system, no library, no recreation facilities, lack of interest in church. I can't solve these problems alone, but I am working with the other people to improve this town. We have helped build a skating pond, which is a great asset in keeping the kids occupied. I find the church is a good place to reach people, and we have been quite active in the church we attend. We have been working with the boys in a reform school nearby, and I thoroughly enjoy being able to do something for them. I always thought I couldn't stand to be a teacher, but I enjoy teaching my Sunday school class. They look up to me and use me as an example. And I say this in all humility. They look up to me and use me as an example, just as I have done with you and with others. Sometimes it seems that I'm not accomplishing as much as I would like to. Then the children will do something that proves I am getting results, and it all seems worthwhile. You're on the uphill grade. The only thing you can see is the hill before you, but this girl is a student writing to the old man to see how it was with me. But once you reach the top, you can look back across the places you've been as well as the valley before you on the other side. I am just thankful that I am able to continue to struggle, and I go ahead with confidence that I will continue to make progress in the future. I do think of you often. Good luck in your work. I hope to hear from you when you can find a minute to write. This is a girl who has made an unfortunate mistake, one so complicated that I was not competent to advise her. Could have ruined her life and may have ruined other lives, and yet she writes to me in this fashion. What is it that we get out of life? What is it that we get out of life? I want to tell you something. I didn't know this in July. I told you in July that old teachers never die, they just look that way. Now on my vacation I got to thinking about how old am I really, and I got to thinking about what the Bible says about this men whose days are numbered. And I got to thinking that the only people I ever heard of whose days were numbered were in the Bible or are dead or something or other, so I started to number mine. And at my age, a year is a long time to wait for a birthday. So I have one every day. I am 22,972 days old today. This was my birthday. And if I make it one more, it'll be 22,973. But life is rich and full, and now is the time. Not when we have completed our courses, and not when our kids are grown up, and not when we have economic security. Today is the day. And what is it we get out of life? It's the human associations and the fulfillment of others about us. And my life is rich and full, and I love every minute of it. And if I drop dead this minute, nobody owes me a thing. Now I have I've got some grandchildren, but we got some others we just used for grandchildren when I was not around. And I got a little girl named Carol, who's a year and a half old. And she thinks she's got 6 grandparents. She thinks I'm one of them. And we went over to call there the other night. She didn't say a thing. She sat on the couch for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden she hopped down off the couch and ran across the room and kissed this old man on the cheek. And said nothing and went about her business. And I would like to say for you and for me, life is of this essence. And say I'm weary, say I'm sad, that health and wealth have missed me. Say I'm growing old, but add, Carol kissed me.
And so, Dr. Ayer, would you come on and as we ask him to kind of wrap up the conference for us. And Carol, what else were we going to say about that he was going to do? But well, that no.
I know what I ought to say. I ought to say excused and all run for our various. I have really one or two things I would like to say. I got introduced one time and we were running against schedule, and I said I shall watch this clock with great care and stop right on time. And a lady in the back row kind of half rose up and said, "That clock is slow." And I would have liked to have killed her, but I didn't. I thought I would take it in stride, and so I said, I guess my friend in the back row has heard me speak before, and she said, yes, I have. Actually, this charge is to evaluate and recommend. I'm reminded of the man whose wife could not cook very well, and so he bought her a present of a cookbook, which is at best an undiplomatic gesture. And the next night he came home and sat down to an unrecognizable mess, and she in pride said, I made this out of that cookbook you gave me yesterday. And he munched on it a minute, and he said, well, never mind, honey, I'll buy you another one. And then, as he came to a particularly indigestible morsel, he said, let's make it a paperback this time. Really, this summary ought to be my cooking of the cookbook you gave me. But I'm reminded of a passage from the prophet written by a man whose name I never can remember and never could pronounce, in which he said his purpose was not to lead you into his castle of wisdom, but to lead you to the threshold of your own. Now, the results of this conference are in your hands, in your minds, in your hearts, and for me to evaluate and recommend is presumptuous. Our morning panel, our afternoon panel, we have the material, and it is timely. I once heard an old man read to a group an item that appeared in the newspaper, a statistic. And this 75-year-old man read slowly. He said, at the age of 75, there are 2 women in the United States for every man. He said, that is the one most useless bit of information I ever read in my life. Now, would like to tell you, this information we had as of today is useful to me and to you, and here and now. And if I have a parting word to you, it is that we must never be the same again as a result of this time together. I have a kind of a contract with my students that I expect them never to be the same again anymore as a result of having been in my class, nor do I expect ever to be the same myself. Now, the implication here is that we will be better. I got a letter the other day from a man in a dropout workshop, and all he said in it was, I shall never be the same again. And I took it home and read it to my wife in pride, and then I kind of had a second thought and realized he might have meant a negative judgment on what I'd said. I just didn't. But we should, in a sense, never be the same again. And the question is, what next? I talked to the American Chemical Society in Cincinnati the other day, and I listened also. I was in a part of a panel, and I heard a long, dronerous report here, and right in the midst of it, 5 men got up and went out, and I told them later, I hoped these men were rushing out to read some of the books that were being recommended in this report. I suspected they were going out for a short beer, but now the point of it is, what are we going to do as a result of this? What next? I have a theory that we live in a world, as of today, which is just exactly as good as we deserve and no better. But it is not as good as we can make it. And we talk about the IQ of the students, and we are almost always misinterpret this, but I would like to talk about the YQ of you and of me, our yeast potential in the total situation. I have a biologist friend who says that one single cell of yeast can permeate the earth. Not as good as we can make it. Now, it's strange what men are remembered for. I appear to be remembered to a certain degree by a story I told on the spur of the moment at Athens and which I have been requested to repeat. Now, I would like to tell you before telling the story that it was a story I heard in the normal process of life in some anteroom or washroom or somewhere, but I made my own application. The story, however, is of the man and his wife who were walking down the street, and passing a lingerie shop, she stopped to window shop a little bit and saw a girdle which she wanted. And he was not much interested one way or the other, but he wasn't about to spend any money. And so, in typical masculine misunderstanding of motivation, he tried to dissuade her by saying she couldn't get into it anyway. And this was a challenge, and she said, "Oh, I believe I could." And he said, "I don't believe you could." And she said, "I think I can." And he said, "Look, sister, if you can get into that girdle, I can stuff a marshmallow into the next parking meter that I come to." And that's right. And she sort of didn't agree with him, and he got waxed hot. He said, "I'll bet you a $5 bill that if you can get into that girdle, I can stuff the marshmallow into this parking meter out here." This is the end of the story, except I say that he lost his bet. Now, the reason he lost his bet was that a marshmallow could crawl into a parking meter if you could get it in the ocean. Now, the thing is, you have to activate the mass. And now this is what she could do that he couldn't do. Now, I would like to tell you that you may forget me. I shall not like it, but this I can stand. But if you forget the things that we have said here today, and if you forget the principles on which they're based, the world cannot stand or stand so well. And I would like to close with another one which may have been remembered from Athens, but which is a moving power in my life, and that's Ayer's Law number 2. Now, I am one professor who can prove that learning takes place in the classroom, because I learned this from one of my students. I came in the class early one day, and the window had been left open the night before, and it had rained in on the reference books. Now, not much else had happened to them in some time, but I just didn't like to get them rained on. And just like anybody else, I was looking around for somebody else to blame, and Dub Rose came in early, which is a mistake I can see, and the minute he hit the room, I said, "Dub, did you leave that window open last night?" "No, sir," he said, "I didn't." Well, I said, "Did you close it?" "Well, no," he says, "I didn't close it." Well, I said, "It looks to me like you left it open." He said, "It wasn't my job." I said, "Whose job was it?" He said, "It was the janitor's job." Well, I said, "Did he close it?" "No," he said, "he didn't close it either." Well, I said, "It looks to me like that's two of you." And Dub was nobody's fool. He'd been in my class for some time. And he said, "Did you close it?" And I put off answering as long as I could, but you have to face up to it sometime. And I said, "Well, no, I didn't close it either." And he said, "That looks to me like there's three of us." And he was right. And this led me in the end to forming what I call Ayer's Law number 2, which applies to what we have been talking about here today and our permeation of the Atlanta and the Georgia and the national situation. If something needs to be done, and if in the end it is not done, then you and I are among those folks who did not do it. And there is no place to hide from this. It has been my joy and my pleasure to be with you, and I would like to feel that I am a personal friend and professional colleague of every last one of you from this time on. And I thank you for this day.